Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is a franchise very near and dear to my heart. For as long as I've been gaming, I've usually been playing at least one Final Fantasy game in the background. So I decided to take a little bit of time to figure out which ones are my favorites. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy every game in the series, but that video would take way too long to make. Right now there are 15 main series games, and having narrowed it down just to 5 that I would consider my favorite took forever. But I did it. And now, I will graciously tell all of you what I came up with. Just a quick side note before we get too far into it though, these are all my opinions, and I can guarantee you that your favorite games are not my favorite games. So with that being said, on with the show. Let's get this one out of the way right away. Don't get me wrong, I love this game. It's one of the first games I ever played when I was a kid, and one of the first RPGs that I ever actually beat. The combat and art style are iconic, and I can almost guarantee that it's one of the few games that almost everyone can recognize if you're a gamer. However, I do think that it's one of the most overhyped games that's ever been created. That doesn't mean I think it's bad, quite the opposite in fact. The music is great, it has one of the most menacing final bosses with arguably the greatest final boss music that's ever been made. Cloud is one of the most iconic characters in the whole franchise, despite what they'll tell you about Lightning. Don't worry, we'll get there. And they know it, with him being playable in the new Smash Bros. Ultimate game. It just wouldn't be right to include a list of my favorite Final Fantasy games without including the one that introduced me to the whole franchise, and for that, it finds its home at number 5. Newest game in the franchise, this game was well worth what seemed like the million-year wait. The open world gameplay straight from the beginning is a welcome change, and the banter between the characters keeps the game fresh, until their dialogue starts to repeat itself, that is. The story is one of the best that I have played in a long time, and after a while I noticed myself skipping the side quests because I was so invested in making sure Noctis and the gang got where they needed to be as soon as I could get them there. The ending, which I won't spoil even though I feel like most people have finished the game at this point, was a genuine tearjerker, and I'm not ashamed to admit I shed a little bit of a tear. I know I said earlier that the game was open world, and for the most part it is. There are a few areas that are blocked off until you progress far enough into the story, but that doesn't bother me as much as it would other people, I suppose. If you haven't picked the game up yet, and are a fan of Final Fantasy, I mean, come on, what are you doing? You need to play it. Pick it up. You won't regret it. I'm cheating on my own list, but I spent so much time trying to decide between the two of these two games that I just couldn't take it anymore and let them share a seat on the bus. Let's get to the less surprising one first. Final Fantasy IV, or 2 depending on your geographical location, has one of the best soundtracks in the franchise. The Red Wings theme at the beginning, the love theme throughout, and the moon theme at the end is just... oh, I love it so much! The story itself is also not something to sleep on, as it features more plot twists than you can even count. The main theme of the game is betrayal, although now that I'm thinking about it, I'm sure that can be said about almost every Final Fantasy game. My personal favorite version of this game that's been released has got to be for the Game Boy Advance, as it has a lot of extra content that unlocks after you beat the game, including the Lunar Dungeon at the end. It's a great time, and one that I will always recommend highly to anybody who asks. And now, for the other one. I love Final Fantasy XIII. Yes, I know, it's very linear for about the first 20 hours. Yes, I know that the characters are all big, dumb dummies. Yes, I know that there's a few bosses that pretty much force you to grind in the main story to beat them. Despite all of that, I always seem to come back to it at least once a year. The character arcs that everyone goes through is what I consider to be a masterclass in story writing, and at least for me, watching Saz go through everything he has to go through and still somehow maintain a smile through it is generally emotional. It makes you really feel for the guy. The fact that they were able to weave 6 different stories together and make them all have weight is just fantastic. Except for Hope. Hope sucks. The hunt system is where I take major points off for the game, as you can only carry one at a time, and it gets really annoying to have to walk all the way back to the main area just to accept another one after you beat the one you're currently doing. I know people hate this game, and they can, but I personally will always enjoy it. Taking the number 2 slot is 12, and boy, have I spent many an hour praying to the RNG gods to get all the right equipment. Still waiting, too. Final Fantasy XII has, and I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, a fantastic story. The game seems to think that Vaughn is the main character, considering that he's the one you control when you walk into the new towns, but I would argue that it's really Ash. Following the heir of a fallen kingdom as she tries to recapture her former glory is great, and Balthier is genuinely one of the best written and funniest characters in the franchise thus far. The hunt system is challenging, making it to where you can't just get them all at once and beat them all right away. And the level up system is pretty good too with the license board. The Bazaar system, on the other hand, is good, but some of the crazy lengths you need to go to get some of the best equipment in the game is downright ridiculous. Looking at you, Worm Hero Blade. If you haven't played 12 and are thinking about it, don't think about it. Just do it. You won't regret it. Oh boy, here we go. Final Fantasy X is my favorite game of all time. I know I said earlier that 7 is one of the first RPGs that I've ever beaten, but this game right here, this game is the first one that I ever truly played. The story as a whole is fantastic, with Tidus' character arc being one of the best of the franchise. I know that he's still a huge whiner, but it's everything else that's going on around him that makes that tolerable still. The voice acting is, for the most part, fantastic, and the graphics and animation were well ahead of their time. Even in the HD remix that came out a few years ago, it still looks incredible. The Sphere Grid is my favorite level up system there is, as you always know what you're going to unlock next. Even in the Expert Grid that comes with the HD remake, you know what's coming, unless you decide to go Rover and learn someone else's techniques first. I think the story goes a little bit off the rails at the end, but it's still easy enough to follow for first-timers. All of the characters are fantastic, with all of their dialogue. It's just all so good, and I could sit here gushing about this game until the Chocobos come home. But to save you all from that headache, I think I'm just going to end this here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.